I want to introduce our next interaction session with mental health tools for the caregiver journey with Dr. Zoe Shaw. Dr. Shaw is a psychotherapist, author, and speaker, but I will let her tell you a little bit more about herself and all she has to share with us. Please welcome Dr. Zoe Shaw.
Hello, hello. There we are. I'm Dr. Zoe. I am a licensed psychotherapist. I am an author. I am a speaker, and I love to talk about a topic that a lot of people don't really want to talk about, which is shame. But I also want you to know that I am a mother of a daughter, 19 years old, and she has Prader-Willi syndrome, which is a rare genetic disorder. And what I want to talk about, I'm going to give you guys some mental health tools, but what I want to talk about is how our shame affects our caregiving. So, we all have a shame story. And also, I want to let you know that this is going to be interactive. So, while I'm talking, you might want to get something to write down, whether you're going to write down on your phone or on a journal, because you guys are going to do some work here today. And I know you've talked about a lot of practical things, which is wonderful when it comes to caregiving because there's so many practical things that we have to talk about. But this session is actually going to be for you. This is a space where I'm going to invite you to be reflective, where I'm going to invite you to kind of sit with some topics. And so get ready to do some writing, get ready to interact here. So, I'm going to share my shame story so that you get an idea of what a shame story looks like. And also, it can kind of help root you in yours. So, my shame story is that I grew up first a Black girl in this all white community in Maryland, rural Maryland, with Mennonites and Amish. And my racial identity shame began there. But when I was 15 years old, I got pregnant. And I also came from a very fundamental Christian home. My father was a prominent doctor in the community. And when my parents found out, their response was basically like, that's not going to happen here. And so they sent me away to a pregnancy home in Virginia with the understanding that I would come back without a child. And I was a very compliant child, adolescent at that time, and I did exactly what was expected of me. I gave birth unmedicated in a hospital in Virginia. I left my baby girl in the hospital. She was adopted, and I went back home to pretend like nothing had ever happened. And that is where my original shame story met with my next shame story, and I developed what I now know is complex shame. But what I did, which is what most people do with shame, is you try to run from it, right? And so I doubled down in accomplishments. I doubled down athletically. I was, star athlete, scholarship to UCLA. I was a sprinter, hurdler, was trained by Olympic coaches. And I also doubled down academically. I, got my bachelor's, got my master's degree, got my doctorate degree. I was accomplishing to try to kind of outrun my shame. And so, fast forward, when I had my first kept daughter, I gave birth to her and she was born. This is my daughter Sully with a rare genetic disorder, but which I didn't know about at that time. We were just what many of you guys have experienced, that jungle of the NICU that you live in for a few weeks sometimes after your child is born. And it was in that jungle with all the beeps and hisses and not knowing what was happening, not knowing if my daughter was going to live or die, if she had if her brain was even working, that my dam of shame began to crumble. I truly believed, and this was the message that I took, which was a result, of course, of my training in childhood, was that God was punishing me with this child, and God was punishing my child because of what I had done in placing my first daughter for adoption. So fast forward, because we don't have time for it, but eventually, I began to heal from my shame in the midst of doing all the things that we do as caregivers, parenting, doctor's appointments, trying to research and understand all the things, right? Treating my own patients, because by then, I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and I had to do all of those things and work on my own healing at the same time. And I began to understand this concept of complex shame, which is a framework that I developed. And so I say all of that because what I know is that everyone has a shame story. I have gone through a journey of healing mine, but I also recognize that my shame affects my parenting. My shame affects my caregiving, and so does yours. And so, my question to you is, what's your shame story? And I'm going to ask you to just take a minute and write down whatever comes up for you. And we have multiple shame stories. But my question to you is, what's your shame story? I'm going to give you just a minute to write that down. So, as you're writing, I want to just acknowledge and honor the invisible weight that we carry as caregivers. I want to normalize because, I've read some phenomenal books, some great devotions. I've listened to caregivers talk about the blessing of caregiving, the blessing of having a family member or a child with special needs, all the lessons that they teach us, which are real. Yes, my daughter, oh my goodness, she has taught me more than any of my other children have. She has stretched me and grown me in the most beautiful ways. And yet still, and yet still, we feel exhausted, right? We feel guilt. We feel unseen, often as caregivers. And sometimes we don't even feel permission to talk about it. Um, and we feel judged. And actually, in this moment, and often we feel judged, sometimes by other caregivers. So that's real. And then we also feel judged, and sometimes people who have absolutely no idea what the experience of being a caregiver is, they will give us advice and they will give us information that we don't really even want. And so I just want to give you a space to acknowledge all of the things that you feel and you experience as a caregiver because they are real and they matter. And I want to give you a voice to also say no thank you to the people who give us unsolicited advice. So I want to talk a little bit about the caregiver challenges and shame. And I promise you, there is hope here. So I don't talk about shame to bring people down. I don't talk about shame to make people feel bad about themselves. I talk about shame because there is so much hope on the other side of shame. So I'm going to start with just addressing what it is, and then I'm going to give you the hope. So the hope is coming, believe me. So some of the challenges and shame that we feel as caregivers, right, is perceived inadequacy. Caregivers may feel that they are not meeting their loved one's needs. It leads to those feelings of shame and self-doubt, and then all the shoulds. I should be calling more doctors. I should be doing more research. I should be, taking care of them better. I should know more about their diagnosis. I should, right? All the things that we tell ourselves as caregivers that we should. That leads to a lot of guilt and a lot of shame. The other, of course, is the emotional exhaustion. The actual toll of caregiving can result in exhaustion and burnout, and it can make daily tasks overwhelming. And so I want to talk just a little bit about grief, shame, depression, right? I know they're just not the best, the most exciting things, but I want you to recognize that there is grief in the process of caregiving, and that's okay because there's also joy in the midst of grief. But grief can look a lot like depression, and depression and grief together, which are probably some things that happen over the course of a caregiving journey, can also cause that overwhelm. And so often we don't have this language for the grief that we experience. We don't have this language for the complex shame that exists. And so I'm just hoping to give you a little bit of a language. And of course, we know as caregivers that we have difficulty balancing responsibilities. Balancing caregiving with personal responsibilities is challenging, and that often causes guilt and isolation. But more than that, it also causes what I call self-abandonment, right? We, out of our guilt and out of our sense of obligation and shame, we will often abandon ourselves. And so, what I want you to do right now is I want you to just pause and I want you to reflect on what parts of your caregiving journey cause you the most shame. What if you look over, and some of you have been caregiving for a very short time, some of you have been caregiving for what might feel like a lifetime, what parts of your caregiving journey cause the most shame? I see that someone has raised a hand. I think we're going to ask questions afterwards, I believe. Someone can confirm that with me.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So write that down. What parts of your caregiving journey cause you the most shame? Okay, so I want to talk about the difference between guilt and shame, and then specifically complex shame. So, guilt is, and some of you may already know this, but I'm just going to go over it just in case you don't. Guilt is an emotional state and feeling that I've done something wrong. Now, most guilt is healthy, although I believe that a lot of caregiving guilt, a lot of mama guilt, dad guilt, parenting guilt is not healthy. But most guilt is healthy in that it tells you I've done something wrong. And so the benefit of guilt, the reason why guilt can be healthy is that it is an inciter for action, right? So if you feel that you've broken your moral code, then there's something you can do about it. You can go back and attempt to repair, apologize. And sometimes we do things and we can't undo them, but we can apologize. And then the most important thing is that we can choose to do something different. So there is a resolve, there is something to do with guilt. We can repair and we can choose to not do that anymore. Shame, though, shame is an emotional state, also physiological, and a feeling that and a message that says, I am wrong. I am inherently unworthy. I am not a good parent. I am not a good caregiver. I don't have the tool. I am unworthy or not good enough. That's what shame tells us. And the problem with shame, and the reason why shame is unhealthy in all of its states, is that if you shame's attached to your identity. If you are wrong, then there's nothing for you to do but hide. So shame makes us hide in all aspects of our life, right? And so when we're trying to understand shame, the very first thing I ask somebody to do is where are the places that you're hiding in your life? Anytime you feel like I don't want people to know that, or I have to cover this up, that is exactly where your shame hides. And the question is, okay, so what does that have to do with caregiving? Well, the thing with our shame is that we tend to either internalize it or project it. And sometimes we do both. We go back and forth. And in our caregiving, and I can certainly speak to myself as a caregiver, I had a lot of shame about having a daughter with special needs, about how she didn't fit in, about how we didn't fit in as a family. I had a lot of shame about not being enough or not doing enough for her. No matter, I could stay up all night doing all the research, but when the morning came and I was exhausted and my hair was falling out, it still wasn't enough, right? And so our shame can show up in our caregiving. And the thing about shame is that when we hide, because that's what shame makes us do, and then we show up for our people, we are not showing up as our full selves. And so there it creates distance because that's what shame does in our lives is it makes us hide and hiding creates distance in our relationships. And when we are showing up as part of ourselves, whether in romantic relationships, parenting, caregiving, work, then what we are receiving back from other people, number one, we perceive that even if they care for us, even if they're kind of doing the thing they're supposed to do, we feel like, but they don't really get me or know me, or I have to wear this facade, which is a burden. And we don't realize how heavy that burden is, even in our caregiving. And so that's kind of the insidious nature of shame. Now, complex shame is a whole nother thing. And many people who experience trauma, and to be honest with you, there's a lot of trauma involved in caregiving, and there's a lot of trauma involved in having a child with special needs. And so, because grief and trauma go together, all of those things, I'm sure all of you have heard the wonderful poem, Welcome to Holland, and that really addresses the trauma of having a child with special needs. Um, and so, complex shame, the thing about complex shame is that we attach so many things to our shame in such a way that when we do the thing that works with simple shame, which is talking about our shame, and then somebody else giving us validation or external compassion, it doesn't work. And the reason why, there's two reasons actually. The first is that when someone gives us that external compassion when we're vulnerable, when we talk about the hard day we've had, when we talk about how we feel like we're not good enough and we don't have all the tools, and they give us this compassion, what happens is there's a part of us that says, oh, but you don't know. You don't know what I did yesterday. You don't know that I lost my temper. You don't know that, I missed that doctor's appointment. Now it's going to be 8 months before I can reschedule that appointment. You don't know. And so we're not able to accept that compassion because of our complex shame. The other is that when we are vulnerable, and somebody instead gaslights us, those well-intentioned people that tell us, oh, well, I'm sure that's not really what's happening, or give us these kind of placating words, we don't feel any type of understanding, and so our shame, because it feels isolating, just goes deeper. And so our shame, as you know, in our parenting makes us hide. And then we tend to sabotage. We tend to self-sabotage by not delegating, not asking for help, and abandoning ourselves. And so after this, I promise the hope is coming. So what I want to ask you to write down is, what words do you say to yourself when you feel like you're not enough? And where did these shame messages come from? So if you could write those things down. What words did you say to yourself, or do you say to yourself, when you feel that you're not enough? And where did those shame messages come from? So, what we're not going to do is heal all the things in one session today. I did write a book all about complex shame, and there's 8 steps to healing and maintenance. But what I do want to talk about a little bit is self-abandonment versus sacrifice. So, as caregivers, we are called to sacrifice, right? We are called to care for those in our care and in the best way that we can. And our love drives us to do that in the most healthy way. But we have to understand also that there is a difference between self-abandonment and sacrifice. And I want you to begin to look at that line, and it's different for everybody, but there is a line in your life, and your work to keep yourself healthy, to be able to continue to caregive in the healthiest way, is to know where that line is, to understand that healthy sacrifice is a chosen act of love. Self-abandonment, though, is ignoring your own needs, is ignoring your own health, is ignoring your own identity, is ignoring the parts of you that need to be and live in the world separate from your caregiving identity. That is self-abandonment. And I know it's so easy for me to just say those words. I know it's so easy for me to say, hey, yeah, you shouldn't be doing that. And yet, maybe you don't feel like you have the support. Maybe you don't feel like there's time. Maybe you have all of these reasons why you cannot focus on yourself and your own health. And I want to honor that as well. And yet, still, I want to encourage you and plant some seeds that there are ways, whether it's 5 minutes, whether it's a day, that you can begin to incorporate in your life to make sure that you are riding a healthy line, right? That you are on the side of self-sacrifice, which is good, not self-abandonment. So as you think about that, this idea of self-sacrifice and self-abandonment, what are the places that you have abandoned yourself in caregiving? What part of yourself have you abandoned yourself in caregiving? And I know I'm asking these deep, hard questions, but I really want to kind of just mine for these things for yourself. And in many ways, this is a caregiving self-care activity, because you're looking at things that maybe you don't want to look at every single day. And so, what part of yourself have you abandoned while caregiving? Okay, so here comes the hope. Here's the hope. What I want you to understand, and these mantras can really be life-giving is that all behavior makes sense in its context. All behavior makes sense in its context. And so when we begin to untangle our shame stories, when we begin to be able to accept what we've done or what we haven't done or what was done to us, we can begin to see that, okay, we've made decisions. We haven't shown up in the ways that we wish. We maybe even wish we could be superheroes and we're not, right? All the things that we feel shame about. But if we look back to the very origin of yourself when you were born with the temperament you were born with and how your temperament interacted with the environment and how that environment and your temperament created your personality and all the life experiences that you've had, all the choices that you have made, all the choices that you have not made make complete sense because all behavior makes sense when you look at the context of you and your life. And when we can do that, we can begin to release blame and work towards forgiveness because those are untangling shame, untangling blame, is actually the catalyst that begins to allow ourselves to work towards forgiveness. So, forgiveness is one of those words that a lot of people have problems with, and me too. And so, the quote that I love, it's attributed to Lily Tomlin when it comes to forgiveness, is giving up all hope of a better past. And you might go, okay, Dr. Zoe, what does forgiveness and all this stuff have to do with caregiving? Well, when we are living with shame, our history of shame stories, the shame that caregiving can create with us, we've got a lot of self-forgiveness that needs to happen. And when we can think of the concept that forgiveness is giving up all hope of a better past, that doesn't mean it's not attached to anyone. It's not attached to me. It's not attached to someone who might have done something to you. It's just giving up the hope that our past could have been different. That is the beginning of acceptance, right? And so I want you to think back to those words that you wrote down, those things that you say to yourself. And I want you to actually say to yourself out loud, if you can, or write it down, I give up all hope of a better past. And then what I want you to do is write down encouraging words that are directly opposing those negative words. And I know we're running out of time. Well, we've got like, I think 15 more minutes because I want to leave time for some questions. But if you could write down that quote, forgiveness is giving up all hope of a better past. If you can even write down, I give up all hope of a better past, that's even better. But then I want you to write down some encouraging words that are directly opposing those negative words. And so then I want to talk about shame maintenance because there is never a time that shame will go away. I don't have time to talk about society and how it drives shame, but shame will never go away from your life, but you can get to a point where shame does not allow you to sabotage yourself. And so I experience shame on the daily. And even though I'm the shame expert, and what I do with shame is number one, I recognize it. And remember, you find that in all the ways that you want to hide, and all the ways that you are self sabotaging, that you are self abandoning, right? And so when shame shows up, whether you're out in public or whether you're at your home and you feel that, I want you to start to pay attention and go, oh, yeah, I know what that is. That's shame. And I know what shame wants me to do. It wants me to hide. And I'm going to do the exact opposite of what shame wants me to do, right? I am going to speak up. I am going to open up and allow myself to be seen. I am going to allow myself to matter, even in my caregiving. And what I like to do is I like to imagine that I'm sitting on the bank of a river and I'm going about my day and shame comes by. I name it, I pay attention to it. I don't do what it wants me to do. And then I watch it just roll on by the river, just float down by the river. And when you can get to that point, then now you are no longer allowing shame to sabotage you. And remember, I said we're not getting rid of shame in those few minutes, in these few minutes today, but I just want to give you just a starting point, something to think about. So the other thing is boundaries. And boundaries is really hard, I think, when it comes to caregivers because there's so much about our caregiving that is boundary-less, right? Whether it's physical labor or connection with the people that we are caring for, it's just a whole different animal. And so part of the way that we self-care is to create those boundaries. And I don't know what yours look like, but I want you to be begin to become curious about what boundaries do I need to put into place in my life in order to care for myself, in order to not abandon. And I don't know what that looks like for you, but if we look at the definition of boundaries, boundaries are more about rules that we create for ourselves, not rules that we create for other people. So I will no longer allow myself to tolerate this thing, whatever it is. And this is what it looks like. This is how I put the boundary up so that I keep this rule for myself. I hope that that makes sense. And then I also want you to think about micro self care. So we don't necessarily have time to even go to the bathroom some days with the door closed, right? Depending on what your day looks like and who you are caring for. And so what I want you to encourage you to do is find these micro minutes of self-care, 5 minutes a day, 5 minutes every now and then, because they add up. And although it feels like it's only 5 minutes, it's only 5 minutes of a break that I took. Those minutes matter, and they do add up. So I encourage you to find that. And when I talk about the definition of self-care, it's not just like bubble baths and massages and pretty things like that. It is also what I call 360, meaning great self-care is being a good mother to yourself, right? And so if you think of what does a good mother do? A good mother, yes, she gives you hugs, she cares for you, she loves you, she nurtures you, she accepts you, but she also makes you take your vitamins. She also makes you go to bed early, do your homework, take a shower, go back in the shower and wash the thing you didn't wash. So when I think of self-care, it's not just about things that feel good on the outside. It's about being intentional about things that care for you, body, mind, and soul, just like a mother would. And the last thing I want to ask you to do is those things that I just talked about. I want you to write down one thing that you will attempt to do this week to care for yourself. One thing. And I want to remind you that you are human. You are not failing, but you are human, and that is okay. And I want you to begin to reframe I'm not enough to I'm worthy of care too. And part of that is writing a self compassion statement. So I know that I'm not going to get it right all the time. I know that I am not perfect, and that is okay because I am human. I know that my love for my child or my love for my family member is enough, right? So I also encourage you to create a self-compassion statement. You can write a little bit of it down right now, or you can take a note to do it later. So thank you so much for listening. I hope that this was a moment where you could kind of sit with yourself and unpack some things. And I hope that you also have questions that I would be more than happy to answer. I did write a book called Stronger in the Difficult Places, which is both memoir, and self-help, and it really helps you if you're experiencing shame, understand the type of shame that you are and how to untangle it in your life. And so I would welcome you also to check that out. I'd like to open it up to questions.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Zoe. We do
You're
have a
welcome.
few questions,
Mhm.
and I'm not sure if you can see them, but I'll just start at the
I
top.
can't. I only see yeah, I can't see it.
That's okay. I will start at the top then. Claudia asks, I can't relate to
Uh-oh.
any.
I lost your audio for a second.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Claudia asked, I can't relate to anybody around me because they don't have kids with disability. They don't understand. My life is so different from other people, but I do believe in God more than me. So that's a comment rather than a question, but
No,
very relevant.
yeah, it is very relevant, and that is the reality of the isolation that caregiving creates. And I remember even, being a young mom and feeling like nobody gets me. And there's shame in that because when I talk about my experiences and people give me that blank look, the feeling I have is I'm damaged or there's something wrong with me, right? And then what does it do? It makes you want to hide. And so I just want to, Claudia, I want to acknowledge that that is such a common experience in caregiving. It's such a common experience when we have a child that is different. And there's healing for that. Part of it is in community. Part of it is in finding people that do have similar experiences to you. And the other part, too, is about that acceptance that I talked about. Because when we begin to accept our experience, then we actually create this thing when we're out in public, when we are talking to people that makes them almost have to accept because we are so radically accepting of ourselves and our children. And so I just encourage you to begin to keep exploring that because you can get to that place.
Thank you. Jackie says, thank you for sharing. I have a similar shame story. Abortion at 19. My firstborn child was born with a congenital heart defect, which slowly developed into cerebral palsy, brain damage, hydroencephalitis, and more. I thought it was punishment too. I appreciate you providing a space for us.
Yes, yes. It's actually why I share my story because there are so many people that think that they are the only ones, and
Yeah.
we're not. We're not.
Thank you. Then we have another. Hi, I'm a care provider
Mhm.
for this senior lady. For some reason, she can't get out of thinking about her past. How can she overcome it? I feel that shame and unforgiveness has to do with this. She happens to be around 70 years old or so.
Oh, that's such a great question. You know, our drive when people express their shame, when people are talking about regrets, is we want to exonerate them. And that is often what we do in the most caring and loving way, and it doesn't work. And it doesn't work for the very reasons that I talked to you about when it comes to complex shame. And so instead of trying to make her feel better, instead of exonerating her, be curious. Be curious about her story. Ask her to tell you more and ask her about self forgiveness, right? Ask her about the things that she wishes she would have done differently and all the little, choices, decisions that she made in her life. Because when you begin to give her a platform to really explain, instead of just trying to tell her, you were a great mom or you did the best you could, those are very placating, but they can also be very distancing. So I would do kind of the opposite of probably what you feel innately to do and get curious and let her talk about the things. And then I actually start to allow her to take some accountability and work on forgiveness.
Oh, I love that. Thank you. Another question here. What advice would you give someone that works as a direct support professional and is also a caregiver after to a family member? So, wow, that's like caregiving for multiple people all the way around the clock, right?
My goodness, caregiving as a job and then caregiving as a life. Wow. My first thought is create space for yourself. You've got to get deep into self-care. And it's not easy to do, and it can feel very selfish. But what we don't understand is that the more we care for ourselves, the more capacity we have to care for others better. When we continue to just self sacrifice and self abandon, we don't show up for our people well. We'll show up because we feel this obligation, right? We'll show up, but we're going to be, resentful and angry and sick, right? Internally, sometimes and bodily. And so, my answer to you is deep, radical self care on a regular basis.
Thank you. Lots of great comments about just how helpful this is. Thank
Oh,
you, Dr.
good.
Zoe. Yeah, we've got a few more questions. We're
Yeah.
getting close to the end, but I want to get as many answered as possible. So Claudia again says, just to share, maybe later with Dr. Shaw, I took up a coffee mug that notes on it, I am amazing, not perfect. And I see that each and every morning. I guess it's sort of a self-compassion mantra. I love that.
That is. I love that.
And then she also says there seems to be intersectionality between self-compassion, forgiveness, etc., and spirituality, depending on belief system and the person. Um, Another question, what if others think that your son doesn't look autistic because he is smart and makes you feel like is all in your head? How can you manage those feelings? So, just being invalidated as having a struggle with a child with a disability, right? Yeah.
Yes, yes. That is the gaslighting that I was talking about when you're talking about your experiences and nobody sees behind the scenes how much work that you've put into working with your child and getting them to a place where some of their disabilities are a little hidden or subtle. And that gaslighting can be so invalidating. Um, and that's where your own self-validation has to happen to the extent that it doesn't matter what someone else says because right? It doesn't make you question. And it also, when we go back to that concept of all behavior makes sense in its context, you can understand why this person, because of their extreme ignorance, is saying this thing to you. They are ignorant. They have no idea about your life, about your child's life, about your child's journey. And when you can just begin to take that perspective of, oh, I hear you, you're ignorant. Okay, I will have this conversation with you, or maybe not, but I'm also just not going to allow these things to penetrate me. So one of the things that I talk about when it comes to not allowing this external penetration, if that makes sense, is if I'm in these kinds of dialogues and these kinds of conversations and it's not something I can easily just remove myself from, or I recognize that they just kind of eat at me, I imagine myself surrounded by this thick green English hedge. It's not a cold wall, but it's this thick hedge that doesn't allow all the negativity to get into me, right? And then I have to kind of just reaffirm what I know. This woman doesn't know your life. And so it really is about your own self-talk because what can just happen is we can say, oh, maybe I'm exaggerating, maybe I'm doing, you begin to co-sign with other people's words, and these people are ignorant and don't even know what they're talking about. So work on not co-signing, work on building yourself up in the words that you say to yourself.
Yeah, not so much about what they think, but what you think about yourself and your situation, right? Yeah.
Right. What you know, yes.
Christine says, you are right. Sometimes I feel shame and guilt that what I did the past and God punished me and now I have a child with autism. I hear that too and yeah, I hate that that's something that is out there in the world and that that's placed on us.
Yeah.
Robin says, I need to be a client of Dr. Shaw. Thank you for putting my feelings into words and make that make sense. I often feel like I don't remember the person I used to be, and explaining the why is super helpful. Uh,
Yeah.
and then let's see, how do you encourage that parents work with siblings and partner to overcome the challenges of all the challenges and adjustments that come with caring for a child on the spectrum?
Oh, that's so good. That's so good. I think what we have to do is we have to acknowledge, because a lot of times in families, we don't talk about the things that we should really talk about. And kids are born into this, and to some extent, it's normal. But then they get all these other messages, and they see things on the outside that look different than our family. And so, getting to a place in your family where you guys are radically honest about what you're experiencing, allowing your children to talk about the negative aspects of having a sibling with autism. And sometimes that helps with you identifying. So, depending on how old your children are, and this can even happen with adolescents who are just reticent to talk, but giving them a language to express themselves by saying, maybe you feel this, or it's possible you might feel this. And a lot of parents feel scared to create something that they think isn't there. Like, I don't want my child to resent their sibling. And so I don't even want to talk about the fact that there might be resentment there. And what I can promise you is that research shows that talking about something that could exist does not create something in somebody. Now, it might actually touch something that's already there and that they need to talk about, but talking about it is not going to create it. And so becoming really radically honest with your children about your experience and their experience can help them just kind of deal with it and letting them know that all the feelings that they have, the good feelings, the bad feelings, the, you know, even feeling overlooked themselves, because we know that's an issue with siblings, is that all of the attention goes to the one with special needs, and a lot of times the other children feel, you know, very left out. And so going ahead and just acknowledging that is something that can just be so healing for a sibling.
Thank you again for a wonderful presentation.